The year is 1943. The skies over occupied Europe are a strategic slaughterhouse. The centerpiece of the Allied plan to cripple the Reich from the air, the daylight precision bombing campaign, is on the verge of total collapse. This isn't just a tactical problem, it is a grand strategic crisis. The combined bomber offensive, formalized at the Casablanca Conference, demanded this campaign. But it was failing for one simple, brutal reason: range. In the 3 agonizing months leading up to May, the 8th Air Force had bled, losing 173 B-17 seconds over Europe. This was an unsustainable rate of attrition. Without long-range fighter escorts, P-47 seconds, P-38 seconds, and Spitfires that simply lacked the fuel to fly deep into Germany and back, the bombers were alone. Alone, German interceptors massacred the formations on the return leg from targets deep within the Reich. Focke-Wulf, 190 seconds attacked from 12 high, a blind spot where the B-17's nose guns couldn't track fast enough. Messerschmitt, 109 seconds dove through the formations, picking off stragglers who fell behind. Crews called it the gauntlet. The statistical reality was horrifying. At a 4% loss rate per mission, a crewman's chance of completing his 25-mission tour was mathematically less than 10%.
The B-17,
the pressure on Army Air Force's command was immense. They needed an answer, and they needed it yesterday. The solution that emerged was not one of elegance, but of brute force. It was born of desperation. If fighters couldn't escort bombers all the way to Germany and back, they would turn a bomber into a fighter. This was the genesis of Project YB-40. It was an attempt to solve a problem of finesse with overwhelming, localized firepower. A flying battleship designed to sail in a convoy of flying freighters. Army Air Force's engineers took a standard B-17F and stripped everything that didn't shoot. The bombs were gone. The bomb bay was converted into a massive ammunition magazine. The bombardier station was radically converted to house a twin 50 caliber Bendix chin turret. A second dorsal turret was installed behind the radio room. The single waist guns were replaced with twin mounts. Cheek guns were added to the forward fuselage. Ammunition capacity was tripled to a staggering 11,275 rounds. Additional armor plating was welded to crew positions. The final tally: 16 50 caliber machine guns on one aircraft. They called it the YB-40, the Flying Destroyer. At 11:47 a.m. on May 29th, 1943, Captain James Hartwell climbed into the cockpit of his B-17 at RAF Allenbury. He watched the ground crew load the last belt of 50 caliber ammunition into the modified bomber's 17th gun position. Hartwell was 26 years old, a veteran of 42 combat missions, but he had zero experience in what he was about to fly. The YB-40 weighed 4,000 pounds, more than any flying fortress he'd ever touched. Douglas Aircraft in Tulsa had completed 12 of these conversions by March, and the 92nd Bombardment Group received them in early May. Colonel William Reed selected 7 crews to fly this first combat test. Hartwell got aircraft 42 to 5,738. His crew called it Hedgehog. The weight made everything wrong. A standard B-17F climbed to 20,000 feet in 25 minutes. The YB-40 needed 48. The control yoke felt different, heavier, dead. An aircraft commander who had test-flown it at Wright Field warned Hartwell the center of gravity sat wrong with all that ammunition loaded behind the bomb bay. This was the gamble. The engineers had traded performance for protection. They had violated a fundamental law of aerial combat. Speed is life. The question hanging in the damp English air was simple. Could 11,000 rounds of ammunition compensate for a fatal lack of agility? But the guns. Hartwell had never seen firepower like this on a bomber. The chin turret alone, a brand new innovation, could shred a Focke-Wulf before it even closed to firing range. Every approach vector was covered. Every angle of attack would be met with overlapping fields of fire. The strategic targeting for this first crucial test was no coincidence. The mission brief was simple. Escort the main formation to St. Nazaire. Attack the submarine pens. This was the artery of the German U-boat war. These pens, massive concrete bunkers impervious to conventional bombing, were bleeding the Allies dry in the Battle of the Atlantic. The 7 YB-42s were positioned in the most vulnerable spots. Low squadron, trail element, anywhere German fighters loved to hunt. Hartwell started the engines. At 1:25 p.m., all 4 Wright Cyclones ran smooth. The control tower cleared them for takeoff at 1:50. Hedgehog lumbered down the runway, heavy and sluggish, with 168 other B-17 seconds following. The formation reached the French coast at 3:30. Flak bursts dotted the sky. Radio chatter confirmed German fighters scrambling from airfields near Rennes. Hartwell's flight engineer, Technical Sergeant Paul Morrison, reported fuel consumption tracking higher than briefed. The beast was thirsty. The extra weight and drag meant the engines were already under strain, just to stay in formation. St. Nazaire appeared through broken clouds at 4:02 p.m. The main formation dropped their bombs and turned for home. This was the moment, the precise second where the entire YB-40 concept would be proven or broken. For the standard B-17 seconds, the bomb drop meant salvation. They were instantly 10,000 to 12,000 pounds lighter. They became faster, more nimble, and could climb higher. But for Hartwell, there was no bomb drop. His bombs were 11,000 rounds of ammunition and extra armor, and he hadn't yet fired a shot. The empty B-17Fs climbed faster, accelerated quicker. Hartwell pushed the throttles forward. Hedgehog started falling behind. The standard B-17 seconds pulled away at 160 miles per hour. Hartwell had the throttles at maximum continuous power. Hedgehog managed 148. The gap began to open. A few hundred yards, then a mile. The Protector was already failing its first most basic duty, to keep up. Morrison checked the engine instruments and shook his head. Number 3 cylinder head temperature was climbing into the red. The extra weight and drag made the Cyclones work harder than they were designed for. Morrison throttled back the number 3 engine before it overheated. Hedgehog slowed to 142 miles per hour. The main formation was 3 miles ahead now. Then 4. Hartwell could see the other 6 YB-40 seconds, all struggling at the rear of their assigned groups, every one of them falling behind. The radio operator called from the waist. Staff Sergeant Frank Delaney had spotted contrails at 4 high. German fighters. Focke-Wulf, 190 seconds from Jagdgeschwader 2. They were hunting stragglers. The YB-40 was designed to hunt the wolves. Now, it was being marked as prey. The experiment was about to enter its live fire and fatal phase. Hartwell keyed the intercom. All gunners, track targets. The The chin turret gunner reported good visibility. The first Focke-Wulf dove at 5. The tail gunner opened fire. The German pilot broke left. The second attack came from 11 high. 2 Focke-Wulfs in trail. The chin turret gunner tracked the lead aircraft and fired a 4-second burst. 50 caliber rounds stitched across the FW-190's engine, cowling. For 6 minutes, the YB-40's firepower worked exactly as designed. 3 more German fighters approached. 3 more attacks broke off early. The overlapping fields of fire created a wall of lead no pilot wanted to penetrate. It was a tactical victory. The gunship could fight. The chin turret, in its very first combat test, had proven its lethal effectiveness against the dreaded 12 high attack. But this small victory was being swallowed by a massive strategic failure. Hedgehog was still slowing down. The main formation was 6 miles ahead now. Then, 7. Hartwell could barely see the bomber stream against the afternoon sky. Morrison reported the fuel state. They'd burned 800 gallons more than briefed during the climb and combat. The equation had inverted. The protector had become the protected, and now it was becoming the abandoned. Another pair of Focke-Wulfs appeared at 2. These pilots didn't break off. They'd figured it out. They had seen the straggler, noted its unique profile with the extra turret, and realized the critical, fatal truth. The YB-40 couldn't keep up. It couldn't run. The German fighters circled at a distance, like sharks, waiting for the right moment to attack from multiple vectors simultaneously. Hartwell pushed the throttles forward again. Number 3 engine temperature climbed back into the red. Morrison watched the gauge and said nothing. The escort bomber with 16 guns had become the target it was supposed to protect. The attack came at 4:43 p.m. This was not a tentative probe by a lone fighter. This was a coordinated, multi-vector execution. 3 Focke-Wulfs, separating and attacking from high right, low left, and dead ahead at 12 level. This was the Luftwaffe's classic Zangenangriff, a pincer movement designed to divide a bomber's defensive fire, overwhelm its gunners, and deliver a killing blow. For a standard B-17, it would be a nightmare. For the YB-40, it was the final exam. Hartwell couldn't evade. The YB-40, weighed down by its own arsenal, turned like a freight train with all that weight. He had no choice but to hold course and altitude, making his aircraft a stable, predictable target. His gunners opened fire simultaneously. The new chin turret tracked the frontal attack. The top turret swung right. The ball turret rotated left. Both waist gunners fired through their opposite windows. The sound inside the fuselage was apocalyptic. Spent brass cascaded onto the floor, ankle deep in seconds. The entire airframe shook violently from the combined recoil of 8 guns firing at once. This was the flying destroyer unleashed. Not as a predator, but as a cornered animal fighting for its life. The lead Focke-Wulf's canopy shattered. The fighter rolled right and fell away, trailing smoke. The high attacker, seeing the wall of lead erupting from the bomber, broke off early. But the low attacker pressed his run, firing a 2-second burst. 20mm cannon rounds punched through Hedgehog's right wing. 1 hydraulic line severed. The waist gunner reported fluid spraying across the window. Staff Sergeant Delaney called out the damage. Right landing gear hydraulic system failed. This was a critical failure. They'd have to manually crank the gear down for landing. If they made it back, the victory was hollow. They had survived the pass, but they were now crippled. Morrison checked the fuel again. 72 minutes of flight time to Allenbury at this power setting. The main formation was 8 miles ahead and pulling away, disappearing into the curvature of the earth. They were alone over occupied France, damaged and bleeding hydraulic fluid. Then, the radio crackled. It wasn't the main formation. It was another YB-40 crew from the 305th Bomb Group. Captain Richard Hayes, flying aircraft 42 to 5,741. His gunship had also fallen behind. This was no longer an isolated incident. The systemic failure of the YB-40 concept was now playing out in real time, replicated across the sky. 2 protectors, now separated from the fleet, had become the most vulnerable aircraft in the entire strike package. Both were struggling to maintain airspeed. Both were burning fuel faster than briefed. Hayes suggested they form up together. It was a desperate, logical move. Combined defensive fire from 32 guns might keep the wolves at bay. Hartwell agreed. Hayes descended from 21,000 feet to match Hedgehog's altitude at 19,500. This wasn't a formation. It was a huddle. 2 wounded giants, flying wing to wing for mutual survival. The Focke-Wulfs circled wider now. 4 visible, maybe 6. They weren't attacking the 2 gunships flying in loose formation, but they weren't leaving either. They were pacing them, waiting. They knew time and fuel were on their side. At 5:07 p.m., Hartwell crossed the French coast outbound. The English Channel stretched gray and empty below. 53 miles to the English coast. 41 minutes of flying time at their current ground speed. But Hartwell's number 3 engine was still running hot. Morrison had pulled the power back twice already. They couldn't maintain altitude much longer. Hedgehog descended through 19,000 feet, 18,800, 18,600. Then Hayes radioed that his number 2 engine oil pressure was dropping. He throttled it back to prevent seizure. His YB-40 slowed to 138 miles per hour. Both aircraft were struggling. Both crews were watching fuel gauges tick toward empty. The situation was now beyond tactical. It was a pure crisis of physics. The YB-40 seconds were simply too heavy, their engines too stressed. The very armor and ammunition designed to save them was now dragging them into the sea. Both crews hoped the German fighters wouldn't follow them over water. The hope was futile. At 5:22 p.m., 2 Messerschmitt 109 seconds appeared at 6 high. They had followed the stragglers to the channel. The tail gunners called out the intercept. Range 4,000 yards and closing. The fighters dove through 18,000 feet. Their cannons opened fire at 800 yards. Hartwell couldn't climb, couldn't accelerate, couldn't turn hard enough to throw off their aim. The tail gunner fired first. Staff Sergeant Raymond Cack, 24 years old, a former skeet shooting champion from Cleveland. This was a different kind of shooting. The lead Messerschmitt 109 closed to 600 yards. Cack walked his tracers across empty sky. The German pilot jinked left, right, dove 20 degrees. His wingman followed. Both fighters opened fire at 400 yards. Cannon shells tore through Hedgehog's tail section. One round exploded in the horizontal stabilizer. Another punched through the fuselage. Just 2 feet behind CAC's position, the aircraft shuddered. Hartwell felt the controls go mushy. Morrison climbed back to check the damage. The elevator cables were intact, but the trim tab mechanism was jammed. Hartwell would have to physically fight the control yoke, muscle the 64,000-pound bomber all the way to England. The Messerschmitts pulled up for another pass. Hayes's YB-40 opened fire with all dorsal guns. The combined firepower from both gunships filled the sky with tracers. The German fighters broke left and circled back to altitude. At 5:31 p.m., 4 Republic P-47 Thunderbolts appeared from the northeast. Little friends, long-range escort fighters, returning from a sweep over Belgium. They had heard the desperate radio calls about stragglers under attack. The Thunderbolts dove at the Messerschmitts. The German pilots saw them coming and turned east toward France. The P-47 seconds didn't pursue. They formed up on both YB-42s and waggled their wings. An escort for the escorts. Hartwell checked his fuel. 37 minutes remaining at current power setting. 29 miles to landfall. They'd make it,
Even the mascot
barely,
of the 303rd
but the
bomb group
concept
seemed to
was
reflect
broken.
The growing desperation of the
Hartwell
Airforce
could
during
see
the
it
grueling
now,
1944
with chilling
campaign.
clarity, even as the P-47 seconds peeled away. The YB-40 worked perfectly as a gun platform. It was a fortress of lead. 1650 caliber guns could, and did, shred any fighter that got close. The chin turret alone had just changed the equation for frontal attacks. But the victory was
As you can
Pyrrhic,
see, the cannon round
because
penetrates
the
hydraulic
platform
line.
itself
The resulting
was
fluid
a
loss means
strategic
the controls
failure.
will seize up.
The fatal flaw was weight. After the standard B-17 seconds dropped their bombs, they became light, fast, and agile, climbing away from the flak and fighters. The YB-40, however, still carried its full bomb load, 11,000 rounds of ammunition, extra turrets, and armor plating. It still weighed 4,000 extra pounds, dragging it down, making it slower, making it the very target it was designed to protect. The physics of the mission profile had been fundamentally misunderstood. The flying destroyer couldn't destroy anything if it couldn't keep up with the convoy it was meant to defend. This realization was more devastating than any 20mm cannon shell.
With
The
hydraulic
entire
systems
strategic
failing,
solution for the
crew
bomber
fought
crisis,
desperately to keep
a
the
project
bomber
costing
aloft.
millions, was a dud. The immediate crisis, however, was far from over. At 5:47 p.m., Hayes radioed. His number 2 engine had seized. Oil pressure was at 0. He'd feathered the propeller. His YB-40, now on 3 engines, began a slow, irreversible descent from 15,000 feet. Sergeant Morrison calculated the numbers. Hayes wouldn't make Alconbury. He might not even make England. His fuel consumption on 3 engines, battling the aircraft's immense drag, was too high. The English coast appeared at 5:53 p.m. Hayes aimed for the first airfield he could find, RAF Manston, on the Kent Peninsula. He called the tower and declared an emergency. Receiving immediate clearance to land, Hartwell watched Hayes's YB-40, his wounded companion, drop away toward the emergency field. One gunship limping home on 3 engines, another damaged and barely controllable. Both aircraft, the pride of the Army Air Force's new escort concept, would require major repairs before flying again. The first mission was an unmitigated disaster. At 6:18 p.m., Hedgehog touched down at Allenbury. Hartwell had to crank the landing gear down manually.
Designed for escort.
The right main
Proved
gear
unable
locked
to
with
keep
just
pace.
15 seconds to spare before
We're losing
touchdown.
oil pressure on engine
Ground
3.
crews counted 16
that,
bullet
Hayes.
holes in the
Trying to keep her
fuselage,
steady.
1 severed hydraulic line, 1 jammed trim tab, 1 damaged horizontal stabilizer. Colonel William Reed was waiting at the hard stand. He needed Hartwell's assessment immediately. This was the first combat test, the data upon which the entire YB-40 concept would be judged. Hartwell shut down the engines and climbed out. His flight suit was soaked with sweat. His hands still shook from fighting the controls for 90 agonizing minutes. He looked at Reed and said 3 words that would end the program. It can't keep up. 17. Yet. Military programs built on this level of strategic hope and financial investment don't die from a single mission report.
Form on me.
Reed ordered 7 more missions. Perhaps the first test was an anomaly. Perhaps different tactics would work. Maybe positioning the YB-40 seconds within the formation, rather than at the edges, would solve the speed problem. It was hope against physics. The second mission launched on June 15th against Lama. 4 YB-40 seconds flew. All 4 fell behind after the bomb drop. The third mission on June 22nd targeted the IG Farben synthetic rubber plant at Huls. 11 YB-40 seconds were dispatched. 1 aircraft was lost to flak and fighters. The remaining 10 struggled home. Hours after the main formation had landed, engineers at the Abbott's Ripton depot tried modifications. They adjusted the waste gun feeds, changed ammunition loading procedures, moved weight forward to fix the center of gravity. Nothing
Having
worked.
secured the beachhead,
The fundamental
both Hedgehog
problem
and Hayes
remained.
commenced their movement across the Channel waters towards the
B-17F
halfway
carrying
point.
bombs weighed 65,000 pounds at takeoff. After dropping its bombs, it weighed 48,000 pounds. The YB-40 weighed 68,000 pounds at takeoff. After combat, it still weighed 64,000 pounds. 4,000 pounds of guns and ammunition that couldn't be dropped. On June 28th, 6 YB-40 seconds attacked St. Nazaire again. They claimed 1 German fighter destroyed. All 6 fell behind the formation on the return leg. 1 crew reported they'd been alone over France for 43 minutes.
Past
Alone meant vulnerable.
A critical moment
The
in
aircraft
approach.
designed to protect bombers needed protection itself. The 8th Air Force compiled the final, damning statistics after 9 combat missions. 48 sorties flown. 5 confirmed German fighter kills. 2 probable. 1 YB-40 lost. And the critical data point. Every single aircraft had fallen behind its formation after the bomb drop. The average separation distance was 7 miles. The average time alone over enemy territory was 38 minutes. Luftwaffe Fighter Chief General Adolf Galland reviewed the intelligence reports. German pilots had figured out the YB-40 seconds almost immediately. The heavily armed bombers looked different, the extra turret was visible from any angle, and they had no bomb bay doors. They flew in the most vulnerable positions. After the formation dropped bombs, the YB-40 seconds became stragglers. German fighters focused their attacks on stragglers. Galland's assessment was brutal. The YB-40 kills were insignificant. His pilots would rather attack the flying destroyers than avoid them. They were easy targets that couldn't run. On July 29th, the last 2 YB-40 seconds flew their final combat mission. Target: U-boat yards at Kiel. Both aircraft fell behind. Both required fighter escort to reach England. Both landed at emergency fields, short of their home base. In August, General Carl Spaatz, commander of the 8th Air Force, officially canceled the program. The 12 surviving YB-42s were returned to the United States in November. Most became gunnery trainers. 4 were stripped and converted back to standard bombers. The concept had died after just 3 months of combat testing. The Army Air Forces had spent $469,000 per aircraft on the conversions. 12 aircraft, $5.6 million, over $98 million in 2025 dollars for a weapon system that made bombers more vulnerable instead of safer. The strategic crisis of the escort gap remained unsolved, and the bloody skies over Germany were about to get much, much bloodier. But the $5.6 million failure was not a total loss. In the bureaucratic post-mortem, as generals and logisticians debated the strategic cost, a different group of people were looking at the data. Engineers at Wright Field studied the combat reports carefully. They weren't looking at the strategic failure. They were looking at the tactical data. They noticed something. In every single combat report where a YB-40 did engage fighters from the front, it stopped the attack cold. Captain Hartwell's report from May 29th was the centerpiece. His chin turret gunner had definitively killed a Focke-Wulf on its first pass and broken up 3 other frontal attacks. The flying destroyer may have been a sitting duck, but its fangs were lethal. The chin turret, that one single modification, changed everything. Before the YB-40, the B-17F was tragically vulnerable. From 12 high, German pilots had perfected the frontal assault, diving straight at the cockpit. The bombardier's position only had 2 flexible cheek guns, mounted on the sides of the nose. They had limited traverse, massive blind spots, and serious convergence problems. The Luftwaffe pilots knew they could fly straight through that gap, unleash their 20mm cannons, and be gone before the top or ball turrets could track them. Focke-Wulf, 190 seconds, killed more B-17 seconds with frontal attacks than any other method. The YB-40's chin turret eliminated this gap. It offered 2 50 caliber guns, remotely controlled by the bombardier, with a clear, powered field of fire. That turret design was immediately pulled from the failed YB-40 program and sent to Boeing. The Bendix chin turret from the YB-40 program entered emergency production in September 1943. Boeing designated it the Bendix Model A, 250 caliber Browning M, 2 machine guns, 300 rounds per gun, electrically powered traverse and elevation. Douglas Aircraft, in a parallel emergency measure, installed this turret on the last 86 B-17FDL aircraft coming off their production line. These bombers deployed to England in October. Crews immediately called it the answer to the 12 high attacks. German pilots who had grown comfortable with head-on passes, a tactic that had guaranteed them kills for months, suddenly faced concentrated, accurate fire they couldn't avoid. Combat reports from November showed the change. The 91st Bomb Group flew the new B-17Fs with chin turrets on a mission to Gelsenkirchen. They reported 12 frontal attacks. 10 broke off early. The other 2 pressed through and took heavy hits. 1 Focke-Wulf was confirmed, destroyed. 0 bombers were lost to frontal attacks. Boeing incorporated the chin turret into the B-17G production model. The first aircraft rolled off the line in December 1943. The G model became the definitive, war-winning flying fortress. The failure of the YB-40, an attempt to create a super bomber, had instead perfected the standard bomber. Production ramped up at a pace that defined the American industrial miracle. Boeing plants in Seattle and Wichita, Douglas in Long Beach and Tulsa, Vega in Burbank. All three manufacturers began building B-17Gs with the standardized chin turret, 50 aircraft per month, in January 1944. The factories ultimately delivered 8,680 B-17Gs before production ended in April 1945. Every single one carried the chin turret that started on the failed YB-40 program. The 303rd Bomb Group transitioned to B-17Gs in February 1944. Their loss rate from frontal attacks dropped from 12% to 3%. The 379th Bomb Group reported similar numbers, 11% to 4%. The 384th tracked their data carefully. Before chin turrets, 43 bombers lost to frontal attacks in 6 months. After chin turrets, 14 lost in 12 months. 8th Air Force statisticians calculated the overall impact. The chin turret reduced bomber losses to frontal attacks by 71%. But the chin turret wasn't the only YB-40 innovation that survived. Engineers studying the combat reports noticed 2 other modifications that solved real, tactical problems. The first was the staggered waist gun positions. On standard B-17Fs, both waist gunners stood directly across from each other in the narrow fuselage. During attacks from beam angles, they fought for space, bumped into each other, and limited each other's field of fire. Combat footage showed waist gunners physically blocking each other while tracking fast-moving targets. The YB-40, to accommodate its twin-mount guns, had moved the right waist gun position forward by 30 inches. This staggered configuration meant each gunner had room to move, room to swing their guns through their full traverse, with no more collisions. Boeing incorporated these staggered waist positions into the B-17G. Waist gunners reported a 40% better field of fire and better coordination during simultaneous attacks from both sides. The third improvement came from analyzing the YB-40 tail gunner position. Staff Sergeant Cack, on Hartwell's mission, had reported limited visibility from the standard tail position. It had small windows, a restricted view, and made it difficult to track fighters approaching from 6 low. The Army Air Forces contracted with the Cheyenne Modification Center in Wyoming to redesign the tail position based on this feedback. The result was the Cheyenne tail, larger windows, better visibility above and below, and improved gun mounting and enhanced armor protection. It became standard on late production B-17Gs. 3 innovations from a single failed program: the chin turret, staggered waist guns, and the Cheyenne tail. All 3 were incorporated into the B-17G. All 3 were saving lives on every mission for the rest of the war. Captain James Hartwell, the man who had nursed the crippled Hedgehog home, flew 16 more missions in standard B-17Fs. He completed his 25-mission tour in October 1943,
as they struggled
a statistic of survival in a grim lottery. He survived, went home to Pennsylvania, and never flew a YB-40 again after that first disastrous St. Nazaire mission. But the story doesn't end there. In a twist of fate, in December, Hartwell returned to RAF Alconbury, not as a combat pilot, but as a training officer. and waiting for him on the hard stands were the very first B-17Gs, fresh from the factories. He watched the new, green crews walking around the bombers, pointing at the one feature that looked utterly alien. The new chin turret. They asked how it worked. They asked where it came from. Hartwell, perhaps more than any man alive, knew the answer. He told them about the flying destroyer that couldn't keep up, the gunship that became the target, the 3-month program that failed so badly it was canceled before the summer ended. Then he showed them the turret, explained how the bombardier operated it, demonstrated its field of fire, and walked them through the ammunition loading procedure. The crews listened carefully. They understood. The piece of high-tech engineering that would protect them, that would answer their prayers against the 12 High attack, came from an aircraft that had failed. It was the expensive $5.6 million ghost of a canceled program. One pilot finally asked the question that hung in the air. Was it worth it? Worth the money? Worth the effort? Worth the crews who flew those 12 aircraft into combat, knowing they'd fall behind? Hartwell looked at the B-17G on the hard stand, its new chin turret gleaming in the weak English sunlight. He thought about the terror of the frontal attack, about Focke-Wulfs diving through formations, cannons flashing, knowing your own guns couldn't reach them. He thought about bombardiers who, until now, were passengers waiting for the impact. Now, they had a weapon that could stop them. He thought about the 8,680 bombers that would carry that turret before the war was over. Worth it, he said. Every mission, every dollar, every bullet hole in Hedgehog's fuselage. The YB-40, he explained, taught them how to fail forward. This concept, failing forward, is the true legacy of the YB-40. It is a ruthless principle of wartime innovation. There is no time for perfection, only for iteration. The YB-40 was a hypothesis tested in the most brutal laboratory on Earth. The hypothesis failed, but the data it produced was priceless. The last YB-40 mission flew on July 29th, 1943. By August, the program was officially canceled. By November, all 12 surviving aircraft had returned to the United States. Their end was undignified. Most became trainers. A few were scrapped. One, in a final insult, ended up in a scrapyard scene in the 1946 film The Best Years of Our Lives. No YB-40 survived the war intact. No museums preserved them. No restoration projects brought them back. The flying destroyer disappeared from history. A footnote, an expensive mistake. But its innovation lived everywhere. It lived on every B-17G that flew over Europe. It lived in every bomber crew that survived a frontal attack. It lived in the mind of every Luftwaffe pilot who, after 1943, had to second-guess his most effective tactic. It lived for every pilot who made it to 25 missions because a Focke-Wulf broke off early when the chin turret's tracers found their target. The numbers are staggering. The 8th Air Force flew more than 290,000 combat sorties with B-17Gs. The chin turret fired in anger on approximately 114,000 of those missions. Conservative estimates, compiled by the Air Force's own statisticians, suggested directly prevented 2,300 bomber losses. That is not an abstract number. 2,300 bombers, 23,000 crew members, 23,000 men who came home. The YB-40 program, a $5.6 million failure that lasted 3 months and claimed 5 enemy planes, ultimately saved 23,000 lives. The ghost of the Hedgehog and its failed squadron had become the guardian angel of the entire 8th Air Force. Today, if you visit the National Museum of the United States Air Force in Dayton, Ohio, you can stand beneath a B-17G, tail number 44-8-3514, named Shoo 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 Baby, a veteran of 24 combat missions. It is a monument to victory, an icon of American industrial might and the resilience of the crews who flew it. The chin turret gleams under the museum lights. A plaque nearby mentions it was standard equipment on all G models, a key defensive armament that protected the bomber. The plaque doesn't mention the YB-40. It doesn't explain where the turret came from. It doesn't tell the story of 12 aircraft that failed so completely their program lasted only 3 months. This is not a lie. It is merely how history is curated. History remembers successes. It polishes the B-17G, the P-51 Mustang, the weapons that won the war. It forgets the failures. The YB-40, the $5.6 million mistake, the flying destroyer that needed protection instead of providing it, simply disappeared. But failures teach lessons that successes never can. The YB-40 program was not a waste. It was a $5.6 million education, paid for in aviation fuel and combat stress. It proved that good ideas, when poorly executed, still contain good ideas. Boeing and Army Air Force's engineers, in their post-mortem, didn't see the YB-40 as a categorical failure. They saw it as research. It was a hypothesis, tested in the most brutal laboratory on Earth, and it had returned invaluable data. That data said, the core concept of an escort bomber is physically unsound due to the laws of aerodynamics and power-to-weight ratios. However, the individual components designed to solve the B-17's vulnerabilities are unqualified successes. The engineers, therefore, did what good engineers always do. They took what worked and fixed what didn't. They kept the chin turret and dropped the 4,000 pounds of extra weight. They kept the staggered waist guns and discarded the extra dorsal turret. They kept the improved tail design and abandoned the flawed center of gravity. It was simple, effective, and life-saving. This doctrine, this ability to fail forward, was the unglamorous, bureaucratic, and absolutely essential engine of Allied victory. In 1943, the 8th Air Force was losing the air war. The daylight bombing campaign, the strategic linchpin for crippling the Reich, was being bled white. There was no time to design the perfect weapon system from scratch. The only path forward was rapid, brutal iteration. Test, fail, learn, adapt, deploy. The YB-40 was the test and fail phase. The B-17G was the adapt and deploy phase. The YB-40 was the wrong answer to the right question. The question was, how do we protect the bombers? The YB-40's answer, by making a bomber a fighter, was wrong. But in the process of failing, it provided the vital components that allowed the existing bomber fleet to survive. It was the crucial stopgap. It plugged the B-17's most glaring defensive hole, the 12 high attack. just long enough for the real strategic solution to arrive in theater. The Rolls-Royce Merlin-powered P-51 Mustang, the flying destroyer, died, forgotten by all but the crews who flew it and the engineers who studied its reports. No YB-40 survived the war. They were scrapped, stripped, or used as props. But their innovation lived on, bolted to the nose of 8,680 other aircraft. Their legacy is not in a museum, but in the mission logs of the 303rd, the 91st, and every other bomb group that saw its loss rates from frontal attacks plummet by 71%. The YB-40 program lasted 3 months, flew 48 combat sorties, and cost $5.6 million, only to be canceled in disgrace. But the data from those 48 sorties saved an estimated 2,300 bombers, 23,000 airmen who came home, 23,000 lives saved by a failure. The 12 flying destroyers became the guardian angels of the entire 8th Air Force, a ghost in the machine of the very bombers they couldn't keep up with.